We stood at the outskirts of the party, floatsome in this sea of bodies. The Fae had brought an atmosphere to the party that had not been seen in these walls before. Even the most energetic garden parties or the most raucous company picnics couldn't compare to the presence of these creatures. Being around them was like drinking something strong and heady. Their words, like a rich meal, their laughter, made me feel the way I assumed drugs would. I had never used drugs, other than a little weed at the shows I used to attend, but this was how the people in the movies acted when they were on drugs, so I assumed it must be that way. Randy and I looked like wallflowers as we hung out near the snack table, and when someone laughed at us, I turned to find it was Tobias. The change in the old goat was shocking. I so rarely ever saw him grin, and now he was practically rosy-cheeked. He came toward us, and I looked for a cup in his hand that might explain the change in him, but the horn he held, a dark gray thing that appeared to be from an actual ram's head, was full of grapes. He laughed all the harder as he noticed me checking his hands, and his laugh was nice and rich and full. "You two look ill at ease. Mingle, be merry. None here will hurt thee." I raised an eyebrow at him, but he had gone back to mingling before I could say anything. "Did he always talk like that?" Randy said, getting to the heart of the matter quicker than I. "I don't believe so," I said. He was right. We did stick out, just standing here by the refreshment table. I had read some stories during my educational career that led me to believe that it might be rude not to mingle if you found yourself at a Fae gathering, and decided it might be a good idea to get out there and try to look like we were having fun. "Where you going?" Randy said, his eyes telling me he was uncomfortable as I was. "To mingle," I said. "Tobias said we should, and we might seem rude if we just stand here all night." "I don't know if that's a good idea. These guys just seem a little weird. I don't know if it's a good idea to get close." Randy was practically shaking as he delivered this pronouncement, and I think it was the most tense I had ever seen him. "Randy, what's got you so spooked?" I asked, taking a step back towards the table. I'd watched him swing that club at creatures way weirder than this, but social situations were where he drew the line. "I don't know. I don't like the way these guys make me feel. It makes me feel weird, out of control. I don't like that." I almost laughed, but I realized how serious he was being. Randy was a good guy, despite my initial impression of him when I started here, but it appeared that he had a real problem cutting loose. Randy was probably one of those guys who liked to be in control of himself all the time, but it was weird to see it so openly on display. "You can come with me if you want," I said, reaching out a hand. "At least that way we'll be there together, so we can keep each other in order." He thought about it, but eventually just shook his head and slumped against the table. "Nah, kid. Go take in the sights. I'll be here when you get back." I didn't want to just leave him there, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious to see what might be happening on the other side of the revelries. The band of Brandylow seemed to have been supplemented with a Fae orchestra, and the music had taken on a hedonistic bend. As I walked amongst the revelers, I was surprised when many of them tipped their heads to me in passing. I returned the gesture, not quite sure what to make of it. I was a representative of the lady, but I wasn't honestly sure how much respect was due to me as a deputy of the garden. They treated me like I was on a level of respect that I often gave someone from law enforcement, and it was nice to be treated like more than just a rent-a-cop for once. As I moved amongst the crowd, I was a little surprised by the thickness of the gathering. How many of them had come in with Her Highness? It had seemed to be less than 20, not counting her guards, but the crowd here seemed to be more in line with 50, or even 100. I stepped up onto one of the daises and saw that they were spread about the place in loose clumps, but there were definitely others taking in the garden beyond. They seemed endless, and I wondered if that too was part of the glamour. A familiar laugh met my ear, and as the band struck up something lively, I saw the lady dancing amidst a group of fae. As I watched her sway, it was hard not to notice the way the fae around her moved in time. They laughed, their dance becoming something slow and bohemian. It was almost like she was having the same effect on them that they were having on us, and as she spread her hands and made a slow spiral, our eyes met. She smiled, holding her arms out invitingly, and the crowd seemed to part as I went to her. "Come, deputy, dance with me," she laughed, holding her hands out to be taken. I grasped her hands, allowing myself to be drawn in, and entered the heady euphoria of their mingled miasma. We danced like flower children at a love-in, spinning in the haze as we tried to keep our feet. The strangers around me took her place sometimes, smiling faces that spun by like a merry-go-round. I was in the eye of that storm, laughing like a drunkard as we spun and capered through a sea of sound. When the music stopped, it felt as if I'd been dancing for an age, but I realized it had only been a few minutes. "I swear, lady, I believe we have overindulged your deputy here," said the raucous laughter as it cascaded over me like a wave. I was stumbling, trying to get my bearings, but when a soft hand found my shoulder, I felt my equilibrium settle. I looked up to find the lady looking at me with concern. "Are you well? I did not mean to do you harm." I'm fine," I said, sincerely. "I feel a lot better now." She smiled, starting to say something as the dancers called her back. "I'm wanted again. Would you like to come back with me?" I wanted to say yes. It was hard not to say yes when she asked you, but I shook my head and wobbled a little. "Let me take in the air a little, my lady. Save a dance for me, though." She nodded, returning to the others as they danced and capered beneath the moon. I walked amongst the displays, unaware that I was following my usual route until I was halfway through it. The fae stood taking in the exhibits, commenting on the plants displayed in a mostly complimentary way. One in particular, a tall, dark-haired fae with a dress that looked like an opening flower, was particularly gushing over a display of spring violets, and as I migrated closer, she noticed my toga and called me over. You're the deputy, aren't you?" She sounded like the little designer from the Incredibles movie, and it was hard not to laugh as I came closer. Some of her height, I realized, was due to her hair, and as I recognized the beehive hairdo, I was surprised to see a bee fly lazily out. She raised a well-manicured eyebrow at me, and I set my eyes back on her face as I asked her what I could do for her. "These flowers, did your lady grow them?" I nodded, not quite understanding the question. "And the colors, did she grow them like that, or are they artificial?" The lady grew them just like that, ma'am." She humphed, turning away from one of the attendants and shaking her head. "I told Titania this lady is trying to usurp her. She thinks she can make spring and winter. She thinks that she can make such wonders more marvelous than I, me, Galen, the springsmith. I have never been so insulted." I should have thought better of it, but as she railed to no one in particular, I felt obligated to defend the lady. "I don't believe she has any designs on your job, ma'am. The lady just wants to make the garden as grand as she can, to bring in the customers." The strange fae humphed again, turning away from me as she headed in the opposite direction. "A word of advice, little man. No one ever does anything for no reason. Remember that, and ask yourself why she would make all of this for the purpose of others' happiness, and why she would trade your free will for servitude." As she walked away, her attendants staying close, I decided to continue on in the opposite direction. On my way through the grove, I heard someone talking in a low voice to someone whose voice seemed incapable of anything but loud creaks. "I'm glad you found a safe place to stay. I know your world is getting smaller by the year. I wish there was more that could be done, but all our worlds are becoming smaller as the humans spread into deeper parts of the world. As I came into the grove, I found the last person I had expected to find sitting amongst the tree guardians that had turned the tides in our favor during the War of Winter. They were all clustered around her, looking like children hearing a story from their mother, and they all looked massive beside the well-dressed woman. They all turned to look at me as I approached, the sound of creaking wood making me grit my teeth, and Titania smirked as she waved me over. "You must be this deputy I've heard so much about. Come closer, I don't bite. Let me see this brandy-low that my friends speak so highly of." I could find no reason to refuse, so I came carefully towards her as I picked my way through the seated guardians. She patted the rock on which she was sitting, inviting me to sit so that she could have a good look at me. "She is quite fond of you, you know. She says the two of you have had many conversations about the human world and how she might better live within it. It's endearing how she thinks any of our kind might seamlessly move within the world. But I will not hinder her efforts. She will learn in time that such endeavors are in vain. There was a time when the humans wanted to know of us, to live with us, but that time has long passed. I fear that the same time has passed for these gentle souls as well," she said, reaching out to stroke one of the guardians lovingly. "Not for a long time yet," I said, earning some approving groans from the gathering tree people. Titania smiled. "It is good of you and your lady to give them a place to stay. They were once common. Every forest and grove had a guardian, but I fear these may be the last of them in Appalachia. Their time is coming to an end, and perhaps ours too. Pray that your time is not next. Magic is becoming very rare in these days, though this town seems absolutely engorged with it," she said, the last part coming out with such delight. I wasn't sure what to say to that, and she seemed to forget about me as she stared out into the middle distance. I took my leave a few minutes later, preferring to leave her to her personal revels. I decided it might be time to return to the party, not sure how long I had been gone, but I had come around the corner of the bottommost ring when I came upon a quiet conversation going on near the ticket booth. The speakers were outside the gate, too far to be seen or even heard clearly. I could see someone's back, armored in a deep green plate, as they leaned against the ticket booth, with a head of fluffy yellow dandelion hair above the armored shoulders. I felt foolish for skulking there, intending to move off so as not to be caught eavesdropping, when I heard the man in the green armor speak about the lady. But how was she back? We were careful. We sealed her away with the help of the green man, or whatever Mab is calling him. How is she back? Someone answered him, but their voice was low and mumbly, like the buzzing of a fly from behind glass. "Yeah, no kidding. How could we have known? She's upsetting the natural order, and Titania is too blind to see it. If she's allowed to re-enter the court, it could create unknowable ripples in the hierarchy. We have to do something." More buzzing, the voice barely audible. "Easy to say, but harder to do. She's managed to put him off this time. We can't depend on him. We may need to act ourselves. Why Mab keeps that creature around in the first place is beyond me. They're both abominations, but I suppose they aren't as bad as the other." The figure got up, and I was afraid he was coming back into the park for a moment, and I would be caught. Instead, he and his co-conspirator headed into the parking lot, taking their conversation with them. I was left wondering what to do, hunkered in the bushes and trying to make sense of what I had heard. Did I dare take this to somebody? I had no idea who the speaker had been, and an accusation without an identity would be useless. I decided to head back to the party, hoping that maybe I would get some clues when I arrived. I arrived to find a huge dance going on, Titania and the lady in the middle of it as the dancers whirled in an intricate pattern. Randy was among them. Most of the brandy-low who weren't playing instruments were, and he was laughing and grinning with the rest of them. I suppose his proximity to all that mingling glamour had finally taken the edge off his megrims. As I stood at the edge of the wheel, it was almost impossible to feel anything but overwhelming joy and a sense of well-being. I was beginning to forget why I had come back in such a hurry, and I laughed at myself as I tried to remember why I had been so afraid. I was being silly, just making myself crazy. There was nothing to fear, nothing to fret about. They never even practiced, you know, came a voice from over my shoulder. I turned to find myself looking at a green-clad knight with a head full of fluffy dandelion hair. He was beautiful, and that's not something I say often about other men. He was like a Greek statue come to life, and my adoration was at odds with my sudden horror. The green armor could have been from any of the assembled guards, but the yellow hair was distinct. It was thick and fluffy, and I imagined there was no way that it would fit under a helmet. The dance, I mean, he said, clearly mistaking my look of confusion. They just show up and perform it, choreography and all. It's impressive, but I suppose that's the power of a good glamour. Titania saw him and smiled as she waved him over, the dancers parting as she beckoned him to join them. "Why, Sander, join the dance." "You'll excuse me," he said, the armor moving without a whisper as he ran to his lady and joined the center dance. They were three now, Titania, the lady, and the armor-clad Lysander. I wanted to join him. The lady held her hands out to me, and I was moved to join by more than duty. If this night meant harm to my mistress, then I would be there to protect her. I joined hands with her as we spun again, my euphoria dulled by my secret knowledge. I would watch, I would wait, and I would be there when the time came to act. I would be her shield when this youth made his intentions known, and I would be ready. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinar for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. Thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, and TomBoiTopUwU for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. my time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.